Today is September 2nd, 2020. My name is Anshi, and I'm with the Houston Asian American Archive. Today we have interview with Mustafa Tameez from the president of the Outreach Strategies LLC. We're very honored to be interviewing you. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So to start, can you tell us when and where were you born?
I was born in Karachi, Pakistan in 1969.
Great. Can you share with us some of your childhood memories?
I grew up, uh, of a middle class family in Pakistan. And we had a big extended family. So I remember like my memories are of having a lot of people at the house, going to relatives' homes and having a lot of people all around us. And then when I was 8 years old, my family migrated to Queens, New York. And so I was eight when we first, plane, or we pretty much sold everything we have, like a lot of immigrants, and moved here. And I was the youngest. I have an older brother and older sister. So when we were planning to come to the United States, there was a sense of excitement around our house. We had finally gotten on the immigration list, and we had very little time to think through and plan. I remember there was just a lot of excitement around the house. I remember getting on Pan Am, which was an airline back then, and you dressed up to fly. You got in the plane and landed in JFK Airport, New York. And back then, my cousins, who we were going to stay with for the first several months during the summer, lived in Brooklyn. And so my uncle picked us up and started to use back roads to get to their place in Brooklyn. And it was a huge shock because the anticipation of coming to the United States was immense in our family. We were so excited. And as a child, I thought this was the land of milk and honey. It would be everything that we see on television. And then all of a sudden you arrive, land in JFK, and you're taking the back roads into Brooklyn, and you see, again, it's 1978. So you saw some, dilapidated buildings. You saw some buildings that were on fire. You saw trash on some of the streets. And, in my mind as a child looking out the windows going like, where's America I saw on television? What is this? Right? I thought this was the land of honey. And so we got to the apartment where my cousins were, and so we were going to share this apartment with them. And our house back home was so much bigger, and now we're in this kind of tiny place, and the neighborhood is just a little bit run down. And so it was just as a child, I remember I was excited to see my cousins, but part of me was like, I wish they came to where we were because we would have so much more room to play. That's just some of the childhood memories.
Oh, that's really interesting, and I'm sure it's a little bit of a traumatic experience for you as a young child back then as well. Um, do you,
Yeah.
do you remember?
The other things I would talk about, like I remember starting school, and when I started school, uh, I didn't speak English at all, very little. And so I remember being in fourth grade, and when I was in Pakistan, I was an asthmatic as a child, so my parents kept me home a lot. So I was a couple of grades behind. I was in second grade in Pakistan. When I moved here, according to my age, I was put in fourth grade. And so I was didn't speak English, no, and so I remember walking around school. I remember being in class and just being very afraid because I didn't know what people were saying, and people were just seemed angry and rushed, and everybody was so much bigger, not just the teachers and the adults, but the kids were so much bigger. So for those first 6 months, being in school was frightening. It was just, I couldn't understand what people were saying. I remember being feeling like I was pushed around as I was going through the hallways in the school. I felt tiny in this giant building with these big people everywhere who didn't smile a lot, who when they laughed, it looked like they were laughing at me. And it was a very, it would tell my mother, who would walk me to school, like, I don't want to go here, I don't want to do this, and she was like, you got to go to school, get in there. Here you go. And the first 6 months of being in school in PS 17 in Queens, New York, was a difficult time. And I've always, from that experience, I've always had a soft spot for people who struggle with the language, who may not understand, because I experienced that myself as a child, just not knowing English and trying to move around and participate and learn, and just being always afraid of not knowing what was going on around me.
Wow, that definitely sounds like I'm sure many of the immigrants would share that kind of experience.
Yeah.
You described a neighborhood that was a little rundown. Like, can you share some more memories about that neighborhood?
Well, even when we moved out of Brooklyn, we came to Queens, we got our apartment of our own. There was five of us, my parents and three children. We rented a one-bedroom apartment. If I had to guess, it would be less than 650 square feet, right? It was a fairly small apartment. Had one, like, a living den area, had a small kitchen, and then had one bedroom. And it was five of us. So all of the kids slept on the floor in the living room den, and my parents had the bedroom. All of us shared one bathroom, and then for periods on, for months at a time, we were relatives that would come visit. Sometimes my father's brothers had all later on to the U.S. So they would stay with us, with their family. So now our entire family was in that living room on the floor at night, and we had another family living in the bedroom, and all of us shared the same small bathroom and the same small kitchen. So we lived like that probably for 5 years, in a very small apartment in a fairly confined area. And so during winter time, which was also new to us, it would be cold. The heaters would either get too hot or too cold, and you couldn't go outside, and so you were kind of locked up with each other, kind of like this COVID. I think I was prepared for COVID at a young childhood, but although it was a tough time, just being in small place, sharing a lot with other people. I don't remember it as it was still also fun, and it was also exciting. And I remember my father had two jobs as long as I can remember. He pretty much had a full-time job and a part-time job, or two full-time jobs. So it was always very, he just wasn't around much because of that. But whenever we had time, we would go to the Queens Botanical Garden, or we would go to watch a movie, or we would go do things together as a family. So I just have really fond memories. We don't, as a kid, you don't really know of step income. You just kind of know your surroundings, and we're very fortunate to have each other. But my brother and I went back to the apartment where we grew up, and we looked at the building, and we're like, oh my God, this is this is as big as the kitchen is as big as one of the closets in any one of our homes. And just, like six, seven, two families sharing one bathroom in a very small place is really an immigrant experience. And we started literally all over again. My father came in his, mid 40s, and he started his life all over again, both professionally and in a new environment. So it was tough on him. It was really, really tough on him.
Wow, the description of your old apartment reminds me of that Tenerant Museum. I'm not sure if you've visited before. It's also like, yeah, definitely very, very tiny, and shares a lot of the immigrant stories. Can you share with us some of the games that you and your brothers and sisters played during your childhood?
Well, I was the youngest. My brother is 6 years older than I am. My sister's about 4 years older than I am. So I was the youngest, and the I think the advantage the youngest child has is that everybody's your parent, right? Like every the brothers and sisters, mom and dad, everybody's looking out for you. So you really do get the nurturing and the benefit of being the youngest. And I think I'm very fortunate to have very caring brothers and sisters and parents. So we just had my memories are fun things that were done for me. My brother started to work when he was 17 years old. He worked very hard. My entire family was, everybody was working because it took all those paychecks to make enough money to pay for rent, pay for food, pay for basic necessities. It wasn't, you couldn't, you lived on, my father had two jobs, my brother had a job, my mom had a job. So it was took those four salaries to basically make ends meet. And so I spent a lot of time by myself. I'm of the generation that's considered the what do you call those like latchkey kids. So I was kind of one of the latchkey kids. So I watched a lot of television growing up because that was my babysitter, so to speak, right? And it was a way just to kind of, although in a small place, it was a way just to kind of escape and be in another world. Learned a lot of the language in watching television. I learned a lot about culture in watching television. And you grow up, you're in the media world, you realize that television has such a big impact, both negative and positive. But we don't realize for people that come from other places, television becomes a window into America, for good or bad. And so I, learned a lot of things about American culture, watching TV, watching, all sorts of shows, sitcoms and things.
Did you also kind of learn English that way through television?
Yeah, like you come in, I was in fourth grade, I was already behind because I was in second grade overseas and came here in fourth grade, didn't speak English. So I was in what they call ESL classes. English is a second language, but it wasn't a great neighborhood, therefore it wasn't a great school. And so I felt a lot of the stuff that I learned, in language, probably learned from television, learned some school, some just doing. But after the first 6 months, I had much more better understanding of the language. But it took another, year or two to be comfortable with the language. And I remember one of the most vivid memories I have is during school you do these eye exams, and so I went to do got in the line in the gym, got to the line, and the person says, read the chart, read the line that you can read, the lowest line you can read. And I said E, and the person goes, okay, yeah, read the line, read the line that you can read, the lowest line you can read. I would say E. They realized that I needed glasses. I just couldn't see. So, send you back home with a note, and went to the Thomas or whatever, and we got glasses. And I remember coming back to school the first day I had classes, and I started looking around the school with a whole different view, because I could see that the red light wasn't a red light; it was an exit sign. And I was like, exit. Right? Because it used to look like just a red light, but it wasn't a red light. It said the word exit, and I just couldn't read it. And so I just went around school that first day, just seeing things really for the first time, right? Like sitting in the classroom and actually being able to see the board. And so you forget sometimes that as a child, those exams in school of eye and physical health and those type of things really matter, because as far as I was concerned before that, I didn't realize I didn't need glasses until somebody actually did a test. And as soon as I put the glasses on, the world just looked different. I was able to see the board. I was able to see the stuff. And then also people treat you different. You're a kid with the glasses and you're young and you're Asian, you must be smart. So all of a sudden I got in better classes. I got in better stuff. And um, I'm dyslexic, which I learned much later in life. Uh, but back then I just thought I was a product of a bad education in the New York City public systems. But really what was that they never caught the fact that I had, that I had a slight case of dyslexia. So I went through my years of school, not understanding why I can't do certain things. Although, because I was well behaved and I wear glasses, I was always in better classes because, when you're in a big school system, that behavior is an important element of how teachers treat you. I looked like a model student, therefore I was just kind of passing grades year after year, although there are certain things I just wasn't able to do well.
What was the demographic like in your school back then?
It was African American, Latino, mostly Puerto Rican Americans because they were in New York. So it was a fairly mixed school. It wasn't a very good school. It was a tough school. Like I learned at a very early age. Somebody looks at you the wrong way, you just get in a fight, and it took years to get rid of that. In high school, finally, I just got a lot better at that. But at an early age, it was basically somebody looked at you because you're just frightened for your life. And so I just learned like you just can't. You had to fight for yourself. And so it was that young age was a difficult time if I went back and saw the different parts of it. But I certainly didn't feel that way because of the family, the extended family, the people that were around me. Just there was a safety net that I felt, and I think that really was incredibly important growing up.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Tameez, for sharing such personal and heartwarming memories of yours. Can you also share how your parents like what are some of the values that your parents empathize in your upbringing?
Well, I think that the one of the advantages that immigrant families have is that we know what good looks like. When my parents, were in Pakistan, they were upper middle class. An expectation that you would go to school and you would learn. There was an expectation that to succeed and work hard. There was a network of family people that were your surrogate parents. My sister and brother were my surrogate parents. When my parents weren't around, there was always somebody else watching me, keeping an eye on me, telling me, do this, don't do that. Why are you doing this? All of that, allows you to be successful. And sometimes I know the people that were in my school that I joke sometimes that if we had a high school reunion, we would probably need some parole officers to come along because there's a lot of people that just didn't didn't follow a traditional path towards success because they just they didn't have the benefit that I did, right? They didn't have the benefit of that family structure, that people that even though we struggled financially, even though my dad worked 2 jobs, even though we didn't have the best school and education early in life, we had that what is the expectation, right? The expectation was to do well, right? So even though I struggled with dyslexia unknowingly and struggled with school stuff, you always worked harder to overcome those things because the expectation was we're here to succeed. My parents sacrificed for us to be here to succeed. So there was high expectations, and that helps because it allows you to try harder and do more. And so we're really, I think that if I was any other ethnic background and I was in that school and I didn't have and for some reason didn't have the family background that I had, that my life would have turned out very different, and not that different than others that were in school with me. So I really was fortunate in that, of having that family support that a lot of times people don't, especially when you're going through first, second, third generation of that environment, right? Because it breaks up families. It's incredibly difficult. It's a harder life, and as Americans sometimes we don't realize that. I mean, the advantages my children have are real and tangible, um, and so we try to remind them of that in our family values, that we are fortunate. But the grace of God, that if for some reason we didn't have that support structure, and you were in the same schools, um, you could easily fall into that trap.
Wow. Does your family and your siblings live close to you nowadays?
My brother, he lives in New Jersey, so we do visit a lot. But my mom lives with me. My parents retired. My father, because I had asthma, we needed health insurance. My dad took the civil service exams and became part of the New York City Police Department. He was part of the Traffic Enforcement Division and retired after 18 years of that. And he after he retired, they had planned to move back to Pakistan, and he actually, was born there and went back and realized that, his friend, the country had moved on and he hadn't. And so we spent 6 months, maybe a little less there, realized it just wasn't going to work out. Moved back to Queens, New York, and it took me 6 months taking the kids up there, and taking my wife up there and saying, come live with us, come live with us. And finally we convinced them to come live with us. So in 1999, my parents moved in with me. And my dad died in 2010, and my mom is still with us. We're blessed and fortunate to have her with us. So in our kind of like nuclear family, my mom lives with us, and we bought the house next door, and my mother-in-law lives next door. So we took the fence out in the middle, so our kids get to go back and forth between the two houses. They have their grandmothers close to them. And so we're really, again, fortunate and the beneficiaries of that family structure, that they've grown up with a lot of eyes on them, like they're, as parents, some and I are engaged with them, but then they have their grandmothers, and then they have their extended family. So that's an incredible advantage and blessing for anybody. So we're very grateful for that.
Does your family practice any religion?
We are Muslim. I'm Muslim by birth, and religion is something that's not static. Either you're going towards it or going away from it. And so at different points in my life, I'm more religious, but I've always been very spiritual about it. And again, it take a lot of pride in my identity as a Muslim American. Um, we um, we struggle with life, like all parents, about how much religion, how little religion, how do we build community, how do we engage others, how do we build a broader sense of community, how do we get our kids to participate in the civic activities that we participate with. But for the most part, I would say we're very fortunate in that we have a really good and large South Asian Muslim community in Houston. When people say Houston is one of the most diverse metropolitan area, we are the beneficiaries of that, right? So whether it's food, or whether it's faith, or whether it's community, whether it's family, a lot of it is all here. And that's why I just love this city. I feel very fortunate to be an American, but I feel even more fortunate to be an American who lives in Houston. If I had to choose any place in the world to live right now, it would be Houston, Texas. I would not give up Houston for anything. I think it offers the best in every way, shape, or form. We don't have the aesthetics. We don't have the mountains. We don't have the the aesthetics at times, but we certainly have an incredible community that all of us benefit from, and all of us have a role in giving back to that community and building it.
Yeah, that's definitely a nice dissect into my our next part of the conversation about when did you move to Houston?
I moved to Houston in 1994. And when I moved to Houston, I used to work for an advertising business in New York. And you get to a certain point in your career, and people say, what do you want? And I said, some warmer climate and a better tax structure. I was 24. I was doing really well. But the taxes in New York were really high. And the weather was cold. We just had 18 snowstorms in a row. And so I was thinking West, I was thinking California, I was thinking someplace pretty, and I was offered Houston. And I reluctantly went like, okay, I'll go try it for 6 months, see what happens. And I came here for 6 months. A year later, I met my wife. We got married, we had kids, and the 6 months have turned into a much, I don't know what, 30 years now or something like that.
And what did you study in college?
I went, I started at Baruch College in New York. I was an accounting major. I was horrible at it. I went to York College. I went to Nyack College. Because I worked full time during the day, and I went to night school. So I went to a lot of the public university system in New York. And again, I didn't know I was dyslexic, so I just kept on going, trying. Wasn't, when it came down to writing in those blue books and the exams, I struggled because people couldn't read my handwriting. And it was a frustrating environment. When I was 27, I finally realized, I saw a sign here in Houston that said, I forget what it was like, are you dyslexic, or do you have trouble reading certain things? I don't know what sign was. It was one of those little small street signs. And so I saw it, I was like, yeah. And I had a little time, so I just pulled into that parking lot and I walked into the building like, oh yeah, we give these exams for people. And so I took, I had to set up the appointment, I know, which was like a week later or something. Went back and took that test, and they basically said, oh yeah, you're dyslexic and you have to do these things to get better. And it finally explained to me, of all the years of just having a difficult, I mean, English is tough, but for me, like learning Spanish or learning Arabic, which I tried for a time, was just next to impossible. I just couldn't figure out why I can't get this down. And what it boils down to is that with English, I may not see all the words, but I know enough to know what they are, and my mind just picks it up. But when you're looking at foreign language and you're missing letters, it just doesn't work. I also had issues with just kind of remembering like numbers. But all those things, what the neat part about the challenges I face have just gotten the technology and other things in life, which has become, that's just made more and more important. You don't have to remember numbers now because you have a smartphone that it's got all your numbers, right? You don't have to, I've always had different support mechanisms. I run a big communications business. So it's like, here you are, dyslexic, running a big communication business. So I dictate a lot of things now. I write quite a bit, but a lot of it is through dictation or speaking into a microphone and recording things and having other people type them out. So the technology has helped a great deal. And then also just whatever your body and your mind is geared for, whatever is lacking, the other parts of you just make up for it. And so over the years, I've been very fortunate in that both the people in my life, the technology that has really helped me compensate for what I lack.
That's wonderful to hear that you've really strived and struggled through the challenges. And have you come across any mentors or people who have helped you to achieve that or overcome those challenges?
The the wonderful thing about Houston is that there are so many different people. There's so many different people that have come in life, that have helped, that have been mentors, that take you by the hand and show you go do this or go do that. And so real fortunate in that. And then the other part is that um, when you're going through it, they don't really feel like struggles, right? I've had 4 hip surgeries. I've spent like over a month, like 6 weeks on a wheelchair. I've hospital for a month. I've been in crutches for about a year. I've walked with a cane for 3 to 5 years. Have chronic pain for a very long time. That's on one side. On the other side, I've been in a profession that I can work out of the house for a year and still make a living. I have a great family support structure that's kind of walked through a lot of the surgeries and the visits to the hospital and the rehab and all that stuff that goes along with it. I walked with a cane for a very long time. And, in Houston, somebody walking with a cane is like, you just become, people think you're just more distinguished. I don't know what it is, but people hold the door for you, people help you. So, the things that I think if you just see them as here are the challenge, which we don't realize a lot of times, what I don't realize a lot of times in the midst of it, is the support mechanism that we often also have that gets us through it, right? And so when you ask me about role models, like my wife is just phenomenal. I mean, I think I probably learned more things from her than anybody else that I've ever encountered or any teacher. Having, we've been married now for 25 years. I'm 51 years old, so I've been married half my life, and the person who's had more impact on my life and how I think and how I work and what I do and the kind of parent I am is a lot of it is from her. So I'm glad she's not watching this because I might not have said it if she was here, but she really is my role model in a way. She is the glue that keeps not just our nucleus family, but our extended family together. She's the one that calls people and asks, like, how are you doing? What's going on with you? I haven't heard from you in a long time. And then she's the one that says, oh, this person's not doing well, so you need to go help her and we need to do this. And so she drives a lot of that communal affection in our household. She's the one that's, being in the profession that I'm in prior to COVID, we just went to a lot of events, and she would be the person that would find somebody who is sitting by themselves, and she would go sit with that person. And there may be a bunch of very influential, very powerful, very people that have status, but her mind would go like, that person's new and they don't feel like they belong. So she would go pull them in. And that's just changed, being married to someone, I'm a better human being for it.
Well, that's definitely really heartwarming and romantic to hear that. Yeah.
And just being lucky. I mean, there are things in your life you realize that you really didn't have anything to do with. You just got lucky, and I just got lucky.
Wow. And how did you meet her? You said you met her 6 months after.
Yeah, I when I moved here, my mother was very concerned that a single guy in a different city, so she would send me to different people's homes that she knew and try to arrange stuff for me, and just none of it really worked out. And then one time she'd asked me to go somewhere, and she's trying to arrange this meeting with this this young lady from another family, and just anyway, and so in that party, I kind of saw her, and then we hit it off, and then we met, and we, like anything else. But we got married in 3 months. I mean, I think I saw her at this place, and I was, in a family environment. I was like, that's the person I'm going to marry. And 3 months later, we were married. And to the chagrin of her family and everybody around, who thought I was just absolutely a crazy person. They couldn't figure me out, right? They're like, he sells and works in advertising. Who does that? He's not a doctor. He's not an engineer. He's not a lawyer. What is this anyway? Can he actually make a living doing this? Right? So it was big to do, the fact that I wasn't a doctoral lawyer. But I just knew right away. I just know I couldn't do better.
And how was the how was your wedding? If you would like to share
Big,
some.
big. I mean, a big wedding, big family wedding. We had 600 people at our wedding. Um, we were related to like 500, right? So it was just like we knew, we have a fairly large extended family. People came from around the country, around the world. And it was hot. We got married in July, so it was hot, and it was in Houston. So we were all sweating the entire time. It was raucous because our South Asian weddings, there are multiple days, so there was a lot of that fun. And we took 1 million pictures. I think the stereotype about Asian Americans taking pictures is real. In our family, we just all stand and keep taking pictures and pictures and pictures. I remember my face hurt because I had to smile so much for the pictures. And it was wonderful.
And how many children do you two have now?
We have 3 boys. We have one that graduated out of University of Virginia recently and is now heading to London to do a scholarship there, and then comes back to law school in next August. And then we have an 11th grader and a 7th grader.
Oh, sweet. And next, I was just wondering if we can move on to the career side. So,
Sure.
as you mentioned, you started in advertising. Although you studied accounting before.
So I started, like, my very first job was as a payroll administrator. So it was part of kind of like an accounting. And then from there, I worked and that was a company called Broadcast Arts. They used to do animated commercials. And so I worked on the administrative payroll side, but my job was to pay artists. And we used to have animation artists. And so they were on what they call the 1099 payroll. So they would give us one invoice and we would pay them. So they did a lot of big projects. And so that was a really fun time to be around very creative people. But, I did payroll. And then from there, I worked for a company called Axel America, which is a Dutch-based chemical pharmaceutical company. And I was I was hired as a payroll person, but then moved into human resources, and I worked on executive compensation. And then later on worked in human resource information systems. After that company had kind of closed, I stayed on in a consulting role because I was one of the few people that doing executive comp knew all of the leadership people around the country. Started a small software business called IPS Research, built it, then sold it within a year. I wasn't very good at it, but it was on image processing systems, which was kind of the thing back then. And then after that, I got into advertising for a decade. So I was in advertising sales for a long time, and started working in political campaigns. So my first boss was Mayor Lee Brown. I worked on his campaign in 2001 when he was getting reelected for mayor of Houston. And that's really how I kind of got into politics. It was Mayor Brown's race, and it was, again, going back to community. My job was to do Asian outreach, and we took the voter file, identified people by their surnames, and then did mail, phone, field in language. We sent, Chinese Americans mail in Mandarin, which we hope most of Mandarin, like, right? We did mail in Vietnamese. We did, Muslims and Arabs and South Asians and different groups. So that became the impetus from that. The learning from that campaign really started the idea of outreach strategist, which I started in 2004. And then the thought behind it was that Texas has just become a majority minority state in 2004, and so in my mind, it was like, how do we get the people that aren't invited to the table, and how do we get their voices heard? And so instead of, being Tameez and associate, it was outreach strategist, because we were focused on how do we do community engagement in a way where we, not only just from an ethnic standpoint, but from just as a state and as a city, as a region, how do we include in the most diverse area, how do we include those voices in civic participation, in public sector work? And that's really how it started. So for a decade, it did more campaigns in the public sector work. And then in 2009, Mayor White, who I was campaign manager and political director for, was running for governor. I wanted to get out of the campaign work, and so went more in the public sector work and started doing more consulting across the board.
Do you see your skills in advertising being implemented in your campaign manager role later on?
Like a lot of, it used to be that in a lifetime, one would work for maybe 5 different companies. Now, in a lifetime, you end up working in 5 or 6 different industries. So I think that's just the work environment, the workforce has changed. In a very short amount of, in my work experience, it's changed a great deal. People come from lots of different backgrounds doing things that evolve. And so for me, it's really evolved. Yeah, it was in advertising and advertising sales, which is a big part of politics. I was in ethnic marketing, and doing this outreach type of work kind of fit nicely into it. And yeah, it has a big impact. So I've been in the industry for 30 years, in politics, advertising, media, for a long time. And so I've been fortunate to have done different parts of it. And so again, for each thing that I've done, I can go back and remember the different people that pulled me in. And, you often find that there's a part of you that wants to take credit for your success. And if you really think hard, you realize it really was somebody else in your life around you that pulled you into that success. That yes, you have to put forward effort. Yes, you have to work hard, and yes, there may be some element of talent in different things, but the bigger thing is it's those relationships, and like kind of your role models, your mentors, your others, who have allowed you to do what you've done. And so for me, starting with my wife and many others along the way, I've just been blessed to have great people in my life.
Great. Can you share with us some of the memories about your mentor and how they inspired or challenged you?
I'll tell you one person that's affiliated with the Rice that's just been friend, mentor, somebody I look up to, Stephen Kleinberg. I don't get to spend as much time with him as I want to, but his work has had a great impact on what I do. His leadership style has a great impact on how I think about we all should be part of the community. His just genuine affection for people around him is just phenomenal. Like I don't think we realize how fortunate we are to have Stephen Kleinberg in Houston. He could have been in any city and could have done his work in any city, but we were fortunate that he ended up doing it here because it's meant such a great deal to the development of Houston. And there's a number of people like him around town that have the social capital and convening power to bring people together to get good things done. It really, I think that Houston has, I've worked in other places, I do business in other cities. By far, I think that we have the kind of culture that has not just a can-do spirit, but a willingness to let new people be involved and be engaged. I came in as an outsider, like many other people from other parts of the country, but I never felt like an outsider in Houston. There was always someone who's willing to, get you engaged in a civic work or in political work or even in business. Where in a lot of other places, there's barriers so that people want to know who your daddy is, or, which family you're part of, or, how long have you been here. Um, Houston just doesn't have that culture. It is an open, welcoming, not just city, but a system that allows people to come from other places, bring their skills and their assets, and do well here. And so, um, I think that that Stephen talks about the Houston area survey and the how the opinions of Houstonians have moved over the decades. Um, it demonstrates that diversity works, right? Because it works in Houston. Um, and I think that we more and more we need those examples, and we need leadership amongst people to help show that pluralism, working in a multicultural environment is an asset and not necessarily a burden. And in Houston, I think there's certainly been an asset here.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very delighted to have you here in Houston with us too. And I'm also wondering, given your expensive and diverse career experiences from the media works to the campaign manager, and now having your own company for the social outreach, the outreach, the outreach strategies LLC. I'm just wondering how, with your kind of chronic condition with the dyslexia. How did you overcome, and how did you kind of, if I may, strategize around your various skills and the condition that contribute your success?
I think that, like we were talking earlier, like sometimes the challenges you have, what they are, but you don't realize how it actually helps you. And I think that in my case, you know, I I have to be able to take a lot of content and absorb it very quickly. And reading it makes it difficult. Like I'm a slow reader, but at the same time, I absorb a lot of content very quickly. I don't know how like the brain works. I have no idea, but um, I work on a lot of strategies for different organizations and different environments, and I have to be able to quickly, for my clients and for the work that we do, to be able to connect the dots. And so, having dyslexia, I think being able to then read, see all the words, is the ability to connect those dots. And so over time, your brain is just able to connect dots. And so if you're a strategy consultant who has to look at the different things that are happening and say, what does this all mean? Um, if your brain is just used to doing that just for very simple task of just reading a one-page document, then it just gets trained to be able to take a lot of different information from different sources and be able to um, um, synthesize it as something that's cogent, right? So um, maybe my dyslexia has helped me that, or something else. I don't know, but in a way, I can't imagine my life without it, right? Because it's brought me other skills and other people in my life to work with. So to be honest with you, I don't see it as a hindrance. It has benefited me, if that makes any sense. And I don't, it probably doesn't, but it just, like, I find that, I live with chronic pain because of my hip surgery for a very long time. Still do. Still, if I stand for a very long time, still, if I do something, I feel it. Um, but that chronic pain has really taught me a lot of discipline. I can get through very difficult things because my pain, my physical pain has taught me that I have a great capacity to be able to get through things that are difficult because I got through it and I still get through it every day.
Well, that's a lot of inspirations and powerful statement. And thank you so much for that, Mr. Tameez. Um, Next, I was just wondering to touch on your community engagement and contributions. So you've been advocating for the transportation advocacy group, and then you've been involved with the Asia Society in a number of talks and speeches, and the Unity National Bank. Can you tell us how like the kind of what are the issues and what are the priorities that you choose in terms of your advocacy and community engagement works?
You know, I am a lover of Houston, and so it's very very a very big part of my life. So I am part of lots of different civic efforts in Houston. My the person that managed my calendar and schedule, um, you know, reminds me of the craziness of my civic participation. I would probably serve on like, you know, over a dozen boards and commissions all at once. And so a lot of my time is spent on that civic work. One, I don't know how to say no. So when people invite me to go do something, I tell my assistant, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Next thing you know, I'm doing it. Right. Um, but two, there is so much to be done. And I feel fortunate that that I'm in a position where I can contribute, right? That I can help other people in other institutions on things. So you don't really know how you got involved in something, but if you've been around for a long time, you're just involved in a lot of things. And what I've learned over the course of my life, and I know it sounds cliche, but just the appreciation for how lucky I am and my family is. Just sheerly because I can see a million different times where something could have gone wrong and we would have been in the opposite side, right? That our life could have gone so much worse and so many other challenges. So the civic work that I do is really driven from a lot of just gratitude, you know. So it's so you know, I'm on the board of Asia Society recently, so started working with Asia Society on things. And you know, we have the second largest Asia Society after New York. I think our building's actually even nicer. And the work the Asia Society does is incredible. It intertwines with the work I want to do in the Muslim American community because you know, billions of Muslims are from the Asian continent, and that's something that geography ties us. So I'm very excited about that. I work with I chair the TAG, with the Transportation Advocacy Group that you're talking about. You know, I think that how Houstonians get around impacts our quality of life far more than we realize, and we need more transportation dollars in town. But you know, like I could go through all of the dozen plus different groups I get to be part of, but the thread in it is how do we help each other in building a social fabric that creates a safety net, both for people that struggle financially, but also a social net for community and culture. So you know, the social fabric of Houston is very important to me. I think we are, Texas became a majority minority state in 2000. In the Houston Independent School District, 91% of the kids come from communities of color, you know, Asian Americans, Latinos, African Americans. 51% of the kids are of Latinx. By 2044, this country will look like Texas. And by 2065, Asian Americans will replace Latinos as first generation. Just think about that, right? The evolution of the United States. This has been happening since, you know, the beginning of our existence, that different people have come. And it used to be just the Europeans. It was Italians, it was the Irish, and with each wave, society changed and evolved. And after 1965, the immigration law changes. The Asian Americans were the ones that started to come. And what we've seen when people look at, oh my God, the Hispanic community is everywhere, but by 2044, when the majority of is minority in this country, um, and within that time frame, 24 and 2065, Asian Americans will outpace Hispanics as first generation. So just when the Latinx community feels like they've arrived, Asians are going to be elbowing, saying, no, 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 it's our time now. And that is the beauty of this country, that it evolves, and we go through bumps in history, and then there's smooth roads ahead. And I think that right now there's a bumpy time. Whether it's the COVID-19 that's affecting our lives, or it's the political climate, we all feel that we're at a bumpy time. But, I think the more we improve that social fabric of this nation, of the state, of the city, the stronger we'll be when we come out of those bumps. And that's why, my civic life doesn't make any sense, because I do 10 million different things.
Yeah, definitely. I was going through your pages of resume, like where to start.
Yeah.
And next, I was just wondering, given your Muslim and Asian American identity, have you come across any treatment of difference because of that part of the identity?
Lots of different points, but one that really stands out in my mind is right after 9/11, I was on the phone crossing in a parking lot going from my car into Walmart. And as I was walking, somebody just beeped the horn, and I wasn't paying attention. And, you kind of parking lot, you start walking with your phone. We've all done that, and we've all seen people do it. And we go, "Why do you do this?" Right? You're walking with your phone. You could kill yourself or kill somebody else. And that was me walking out of my car into the store with the phone in hand, not paying attention. And I hear this person beeping, and I just like ajar, and they roll down their window and they say, "Go back to where you came from." And so in my mind, I thought, like, you want me to go back to Queens? Like, because in a way, I'm a kid from Queens. And so when somebody says, go back to where you came from, that's what comes to me immediately in my mind. I remember driving around in my red car with New York license plates in 1994, and the Rockets were playing the Knicks, and people would, like, I got 6 speeding tickets in 4 weeks, and people kept on honking wherever I went, right? So in a way, what was hardwired into me is like the New Yorkerness, the kid from Queens. And so the reason why I mentioned is that we all have different identities and multiple identities. And sometimes it is a Muslim American identity. Sometimes it's as of South Asian American. Sometimes it's Asian American. Sometimes it's a Houstonian. Sometimes it's a kid from Queens. And all those identities are part of us. And given the context of what we're doing and where we are, there is a dominant part of us that comes out, right? So like you're asking, advertising, and so there's a lot of things that some people will consider me a subject matter expert for. And so then when I'm in that environment, that is my identity. I'm a subject matter expert for X. So identity is something that's far more fluid than we all realize, and different parts of our identity come out in depending on the context that what we're working on occurs. And that's why I think Houston is the place to be, because it's the most diverse region, and not just in our country, I would argue in the world. Where more ethnic groups are evenly laid out here than anywhere else in the world. And so if you want to see where this country is headed, or what the world is going to be like, then being in Houston is like standing on top of a mountain and looking across, so you can see a lot of things happening, right? You have great peripheral vision. And so where, where this country is headed, where the world is headed, Houston gives you a much broader perspective on how to be successful in that world just by being here.
Yeah, that's a great inspiration and vision. And also, I'm wondering how your, as first generation and your children as second generation, do you come across any like differences in like mindset and values? And have you come across any debates in the family, due to that?
I think that my son is in his early 20s, and I think that their generation is the smartest generation that the world has ever seen. Uh, they have something, what I call it's compound knowledge. When I was growing up, there was the child of the 80s. There was this principle of compound income or compound interest, right? Like that you put your money and then the money grows because it's compounding, right? I think there's a concept of compound knowledge, because for every child that's growing up with a Google in their phone, they can ask any question, and based on what they find, they can ask the next question, the next question, the next question, and so they can become incredibly smart on something on their own. When I was growing up, if you wanted to learn something and you were fortunate enough to have an Encyclopedia Britannica in your house, you could go read a paragraph on what you were interested in. And that was it. And if you wanted more information than that, you would have to then go to the library and look at an index file and then go find a book and then try to read that book. And that book was probably decades old most of the time, right? So it was old information. And it took real effort to go, figure things out. Now, at the click of a finger, you can figure out what's going on, where it's going on. You can get the background of it. You can get details of it. You can read as much as you possibly want to about any particular topic that you're curious about. And so I see the great challenges for us as Americans, as citizens of the world. But what also has to be factored in is that this generation that's growing up is the smartest generation ever. And so their capacity to take on big challenges and find solutions is infinitely more than the people that created the problems that exist today. And so I'm very optimistic in that I think we're living in an age of disruptors, and not just in technology, but in culture. And we're living in a time where great opportunity is in front of us. Although we don't feel it, we are living at the time where we're the most peaceful. The world is more peaceful today than ever before. I would say prior to COVID, the world is more prosperous than ever before in history. And there are more innovation and ideas coming at a pace and a clip that is moving society faster. And so, I am very optimistic that this next generation has the solutions and the answers that the world needs. And so we're all going to feel a lot of bumps, but on the other side of that, there is a very smooth road.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and we are very hopeful, especially I guess now the 2020 and the number of issues and turmoils we're experiencing. Um, how has 2020 been for you, and what has been the most pressing issues on your mind?
This COVID-19 is has affected all of us, right? It's changed the way we live, we work. It's the impact of it on our economy is, and we're just starting to understand it. I think that by first quarter of next year is when you will really feel the impact on our economy. It will change. It's a shared event. The very few things in life that are just shared by the world, right? It's a shared event, especially in our country. And it's going to change us. And it could change us for the better if we make better decisions. And so, You asked about the civic work, is a lot of it is trying to help make better decisions as a community on big, important challenges that we face. We are an environment that if we don't educate the next generation, you know, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So people talk about the income divide. There's also a divide in education, which drives our income divide too. So education is going to be a big thing that we as a nation, as a state, as a region have. Um, like we're going to see an enormous amount of child poverty. We're going to see poverty in general, but we're going to see an enormous amount of child poverty because of COVID-19. It's going to exacerbate some of those cracks in our society. And you can't expect children to learn if they don't have the basic essentials, right? And so there are some real world issues that have to be tackled that COVID-19 is going to really fast track. And our ability to respond as a community and as a society is going to determine the outcome. The asset that we have is this generation of people that are the smartest generation ever. And I think that this election cycle, we will see millennials and Generation X outvote baby boomers for the first time. And if they get civically involved and engaged in tackling the big problems in our society, I think we're going to be just fine, you know. But we do need to work towards getting them engaged and also, the generation picking up the mantle.
Yeah, and I was hearing your Asia Society talk about civic engagement and voting, and what would you consider to be the kind of turnout of the mail-in voting, and what you would consider as the most effective way to get more people to engage?
I am. I believe that liberal democracies um, is the path forward for all of us, right? That um, democracy works, and I have, I can attest to it because I've been part of so many different public programs and projects, both personal life and professionally. Um, but in order for democracy to work, we as a society have to want it to work. A democracy is a set of communal contracts that we make with each other. It's not a document. It is the norms that we create in our society, what's acceptable and what's not, that we know we're not going to get individually everything we want, but we're going to get most of what we want by helping other people get what they need, right? So we have to see this in a communal way. I've been fortunate that I've had the opportunity to travel the world on various, both professionally and personally. And you'll go into a lot of countries and you'll go into someone's home and they have a beautiful home. They have a wall between them and the rest of the world. And that wall and that street is filled with trash, but they have a beautiful home behind those walls. What democracy does basically, it creates an environment where the shared amenities are as good as what most people live in, right? So, there's a community compact that we will all chip in a little bit so that everybody can have a better quality of life, which then makes it better for everyone, including the people that are at the top. So when 70% of our GDP is on consumer spending, if average people have less money, then we cannot move our economy. And so the idea that we all have to chip in a little bit in order to make the whole system work is not just in our tax dollars, but also in our participation, right? Everybody has to vote. Not everybody has to be super politically like a political junkie, but everybody has to vote, right? Some of us have to be more engaged in those civic political circles because that's how we pick our leadership, right? Some of us have to be contributors. Some of us have to be volunteers. Some of us have to just be better informed. Some of us have to create better conversations to move the partisanship out and to talk about issues that affect everyday Americans, right? But everybody has a role in that. And I find that right now, there is a sense that we take things from a partisan lens rather than as an American lens or as Texas lens. And so I'm hoping that this next generation really changes that ecosystem and puts, what the people at the bottom need, what people in the middle need, people at the top need, and not see it that divisive as we've gotten. And I think it's possible. I've got a son who's in his early 20s, and I see it in him. Like he wrote an amicus brief to the Texas Supreme Court when he was fresh out of high school. And it was in the school finance system. And the Texas Supreme Court said that was the best brief that was filed for a lawsuit that had 650 school districts and the best lawyers in our state involved. I've seen him, learn these things on his own by just reading and learning. So I see the best in that generation, just, in parts of what I see in my kids. So I think the rest of us have to get out of our mental narratives of they're just watching they're just playing video games, or they're just not that engaged, or why can't they be X? Every generation says that about the generation after them. Every generation feels harder, and they had it harder than the generation that is preceding them. And I think that there has to be this openness, both in culture and family, of giving that next generation a little bit more space, a little bit more authority, so that they can lead. And I think that will happen. I don't know, it's a little philosophical, but you asked the question.
Yeah, we love that philosophical aspect. And I'm also wondering, you have touched on how the technology has changed this upcoming and future generations to come. And we are also seeing through this coronavirus that it has divided how people with the access to technology and people who are under that poverty line who doesn't have the access, and also the number of Black Lives Matter movement, and the like at the start of the pandemic, how the Asian Americans were discriminated against, and the number of racial slurs and like names such as the China virus or the Wuhan virus and the Kung flu to be used on this group of people, and how have 2020 and the election year impacted all these issues that evolve to? Um, so, what is your vision of how technology and the like racial inequity issues can be um, maybe
Yeah.
I could open
Yeah.
up.
So I think we come, our brains in the past have been wired for like a linear life. Like we do one thing at a time, and then you do the next thing, and then you do the next thing, and the next thing. We're living in a time where everything's happening all at once, right? And we are more interconnected today than ever before. Like when I was growing up, it's just within my own lifetime, that if something happened on the other side of the world, um, you would find out about it at best in your newspaper the next day, right? You would see in your news the next day, here's what happened across the world. And you would see maybe one picture and some content written that described what happened. Now, when something happens around the world, doesn't matter where, it shows up in your feed instantaneously. Not just the headline and that one picture, but dozens and dozens of pictures with video, with people talking about it in detail in real time. So this interconnectedness drives our emotions. So whatever you care about because you're seeing it in your feed in real time, and you are very much like you comment on it, it makes you feel just more of that. So if you dislike something, you're going to dislike it more. It's going to harden your heart because you're going to see it, escalating. Um, that is both a problem and a solution, right? Because in some ways, knowing what's going on in real time allows you to make better decisions, right? So we have to kind of balance that. We just haven't come to we haven't centered ourselves around what's available to us. So right now, people are using that connectedness to manipulate, right? So that connectedness we have now is you're able to use it to manipulate people, and we've seen this in an election process and lots of other places, because the people that have that technology aren't native to it, right? So you have, billions of people that, social media is something new to them. And so you can easily scare them by showing them things, right? And we're seeing that in real time. We've seen we've seen politicians around the world, not just in our country, but around the world, use it to scare people because now they have the power to send something on the internet, on that person's phone, a video, a message, a text, a tweet, a post that makes them angry, or immediately gets them emotionally riled up. The next generations are growing up native to this technology. They're better wired to discern what's real and what's not. Um, and I think that as we get more and more, as the years come by, we're going to learn to be able to understand when something happens around the world, how does it affect you? What does it mean? How should you react to it in a better way than we are today? So the technology has basically brought a set of tools that we're not using in the most useful way right now. And people are using those tools to manipulate, to move their agenda forward, right? So um, if you're a dictator or an authoritarian, um, you, in the olden days, if you march your armies into a town, you would go take over the TV station or the radio station because you wanted to let everybody in that town know that I am new and I'm in charge. Stay in your house. I'm here. I've taken over. Right. That information channels were critical. Right. That because it was like it's a way to communicate. The information warfare was critical. It's the same thing now. Right. People are dominating our feeds, and they're dominating what we're seeing, and they're manipulating that to alter what is important to us. And that the thing that connects us also compartmentalizes us, so it's us versus them. And I think that will change. I don't think that that's sustainable. I think that over time, those that are native to the technology, that grew up with a phone, that grew up with having access to Google, at every question they had to ask, are going to respond very differently to those. They're going to be far more resilient in being able to discern what's real and what's not, just at an intuitive level. And so that's why I'm optimistic. I think this is just a rough patch that we're going through. Once we get through this rough patch, the people that are native to the technology are going to find the solutions to these big problems. So I'm not just pushing it off to the future saying, generations before caused a problem, this current generation go fix it. I want to play a part in fixing those challenges and taking on those things. But I'm optimistic because I feel like the next generation is more equipped and smarter.
Yeah, that's definitely a great future we're looking forward to. Um, and I guess that's the end of my questions. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
Um, you know, like our personal lives are so intertwined with where we are, what time period we live in. And I feel like the world is more at peace, more prosperous today than ever before. And we will face some real challenges, whether it's the economic divide, whether it's the divide in education. But we are also in a position that if we are engaged, you know, at our local level, at our national level, and we participate, that we have the opportunity to build a kind of world that our children deserve. And it you know, it's kind of esoteric in that sense, but it requires everyday action to make that work. And so I take that in my life very seriously, that how I spend my time, what I spend my time doing is really important, because there is a you know, your life moves very quickly. You very much turn around. Like, been married for 25 years, been in Houston for, you know, 26 years. We, you know, you are, you know, a half a century old now, right? So those things move very quickly before you know it. So I have this sense of urgency that, you know, you got to do more, you got to do more, you got to do more today, because the future is too important of our kids not to do that.
Is that the message you would like to share with the future generations in case they come to our archive and find your interview?
You know, like I am I'm a witness to the fact that this young generation is the smartest in human history and has more capacity than any generation before them. And I mean that, and I just don't say that. I say that as somebody who is paying attention and who's actually thought about it and studied it. So it's a factual statement I make rather than a optimistic look forward, right? I can give evidence to why this is the smartest generation. So I put a lot of stock for what's to come, just like we do when anything in life, right? Like you look at a company and you go, this is a well-run company. You can see it. You can see why, right? It's a well-run agency. You can see why, right? And I think that this next generation is going to head that, you know, this nation and this and agencies that are part of this nation in a way that will propel us. I'm optimistic not because I'm an optimistic person, I am, but I'm optimistic because I've actually seen the evidence.